Sarah Glazer, Program Manager at Literacy Works' Clear Language Lab. Thank you for joining us for this conversation with leaders from the Evanston Community Foundation. They are the second recipients of our Community Leader Award, and we are honored to be talking with them today about their work and commitment to advancing communication equity.
And I am Melanie Sampson. I'm the program director for the Clear Language Lab at Literacy Works. And the Evanston Community Foundation, if you're not familiar with them, helps Evanston thrive as a just, vibrant, and inclusive community by building, connecting, and distributing resources and knowledge. Literacy Works has a long relationship with ECF, and we got to work particularly closely during the pandemic. And we've been just so impressed with the foundation's commitment to communication equity, specifically the work raising up plain language as an equity issue through training and support to grantees and the community at large, as well as ECF's efforts to reflect on their own grant making processes and how to make them more accessible, especially to organizations that might need them the most. So we're so happy to be able to celebrate the work you are doing in this foundation space and community space. So I'm happy to introduce, we have with us today for our chat, Rebecca Cacayuran. Did I say it right? Okay. Who is the Vice President for Community Investment, and Akilah Wilson, the Communications Manager at Evanston Community Foundation. So thank you so much both for joining us and the good work you do. And we're excited to chat with you about all the work going on in Evanston. Yeah, so why don't we just jump in and, you can tell us either personally or as it relates to your values at ECF, but what is just the concept of communication equity and plain language tied into that mean to you? How do you see that either playing out just in your own lens of the world or also in your work at the foundation?
Yeah, so I'll hop right in here. I think that for me, the power of communication and equity as an equity tool has always been evident and critical. When we think about grant making and just public service in general and serving our community, it's what makes groundbreaking social service programs possible. And it's what informs community members of the resources available to them, right? So when we think about this idea of plain language, what we're really talking about is equity. We're talking about accessible language, right? We're talking about inclusive language and language that is actually understood by those who are reading it, which is our community, right? The people that we're serving. And so organizationally, it's at the heart of everything that we do and stand for, because at the Community Foundation, we know that we don't just serve one section of the community. We really work to advance the lives of all Evanstonians. So I think, yeah, for me, that's what communication equity is in a nutshell.
I'd build off of that a little bit. The Evanston Community Foundation, I've been here, I think now for 14 years total. And over that time, the foundation is more and more focused on justice. And in partnering with Literacy Works and the Clear Language Lab, I've had the opportunity to really reflect on what does justice look like when it comes to communications. And without accessibility, without people, without allowing that accessibility, you can maintain a power structure. I've become more aware of the power dynamics that come in communication. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but that made us want to really look at ourselves and make sure that our grant making application process, that we were as accessible as possible.
Awesome. And I think that leads nicely into our next question, which is, what was an aha moment you had around the need for communication equity, whether that was personally or professionally in your work at the foundation?
So I think for me personally, I've always recognize the need for communication equity, especially when we look at it from a historic context, right? We know that keeping information away from certain populations has always been a tactic used to subjugate those seen as others, keep resources available to them away from them. And so for me, it's actually what drew me to the field of communications. I thoroughly enjoy being able to inform people or the masses of their rights, their resources and entitlements, right? And for me personally, I feel like it's really a way of righting historic wrongs and being a champion for justice. So I'd say just my life in general has kind of been the justification or the recognition of the need for communications equity. It's very personal to me as the communications manager. So.
I just love that. I feel like you should go speak at like colleges to like get people to major in communications. That's like such an inspiring way to look at that work. I appreciate you sharing that because yeah, that is such a powerful way to think about your role of and all these ideas that are connected to communication in terms of accessibility and justice and equity are so important. And I think sometimes, yeah, people forget that these sort of everyday communication things we're talking about have so much potential and can be so powerful. So yeah, oh my gosh, I feel so excited just hearing you talk about communication. Thank you, Akilah.
Thank you for even having this conversation. It's definitely
yeah.
work like Literacy Works that even makes these conversations possible and gives reverence to the idea of communication equity, right? Because I also feel like it's overlooked in terms of just the value of communication. And really, that's why I said for me, I've always looked at it as my way of being able to be a champion of justice, to be able to meet people where they are and let them know that, you have resources, you are entitled to these things. It's just a matter of not knowing. So that's like I said, that's what drew me to the field and the community foundation, because so much of what I believe in is wrapped up into our organizational values and philosophies. So
That's fantastic. Is there any examples that either come to mind either at ECF or grantee orgs where you've sort of seen the impact of these changes, or you've heard about how people are thinking differently about communication or applying it differently in their work? Would there be any things that come to mind you want to share about?
Well, I reflect back to when we started our partnership in earnest, which was in the first chapter of the pandemic in 2020, where really the racial fault lines were exposed in Evanston in terms of access to resources. And we know so much of that is access to communication. So we saw in real time how needed clear communication was. And so we started our partnership, and what we did was offer a contract. ECF underwrote a contract with Literacy Works, with the Clear Language Lab, open to community groups that were convening and nonprofits that were seeking to deliver their mission in a whole new way. And so, I mean, there's so many great examples of that. I think about, we can talk about our food insecurity task force. We had a group of community members who are getting together every week to really build out Evanston's capacity to feed people by expanding, the food pantries, but also restaurants were starting to deliver because people were sick. They needed to stay in place. They needed to have food, but people needed to know how to access that. And so I remember Literacy Works really worked with that community group to establish resources, to put together a resource that was updated every week in the the grocery handouts and the city of Evanston's food pickups. And we found, of course, but we learned that working with Literacy Works in developing resources at the get-go meant that our translation services, like the quality of the translation into Spanish and French Creole, was so much better. It was so much more understandable. And so I think that that taught the Evanston community about the power of clear language. But I also think one of the things you are so great at is, I mean, you're just not, Literacy Works, you're just such a great partner and not judgmental in any way. Like, I feel like you've been able to really be on the ground with organizations just building new processes. So a great example, I think, is the early childhood centers, where they were needing to really change their operations in the midst of COVID. You remember this, Melanie? I mean, they were having to develop drop-off procedures for little kiddos, like, you know, 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds. How do you develop those protocols in ways that families are going to understand, that kids are going to understand? They needed to build out HR manuals so that they could make sure that they were taking care of the people who were really working at the front lines the whole time. And so it wasn't just looking at printed materials and helping to make sure that they were more accessible. It was really walking with people to help them develop things in real time so that people could really weather the pandemic the best they could.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all of those going down memory lane. All the work that was happening, people were just doing their best to try to switch gears so quickly. I think you bring up such a great point there and this keeps coming up in the work of looking at the processes too around the communications. I think you know, that's actually probably come up more and more over the years than I ever expected it would have. It gives you sort of an opportunity to reflect and say, wait a minute, this is also a chance to kind of look at this system or to look at how we're doing X, Y, or Z. So yeah, I think that it can be a really powerful moment to have those reflections when you realize, wait a minute, we might be able to solve this by also changing the process or making it easier for people. And I think to your point about too, the translation and in thinking of communication justice and that aspect of translation and just making sure that those materials also are easy to understand and that people understand them, and you know, just hopefully reducing the labor that has to go into that process so people can get what they need more efficiently and effectively. So those are such great points.
Yeah, so thinking about, you know, from the foundation perspective, why do you think it's important for foundations to think about and to consider communication equity in the work that they're doing?
So as a grant maker, one of our core values, the core focus of our strategic plan is being able to reach all corners of Evanston. And that meant expanding who could receive grants from us. And so there was a time when the foundation only received applications from 501c3s, from nonprofits. And now we've thrown wide the doors and we're offering grants to community groups and businesses that have a charitable component. And there really is, if you think about equity here, you know, there's some organizations, even nonprofit organizations, who have professional grant writers, and others who are doing the very best they can in the watches of the night at their kitchen table. And so how do we make sure that our grant guidelines, that our requests for proposals, the applications questions themselves are clear and are getting at what it is that our community members need to know in order to make a recommendation to fund a grant? Because the foundation, the Evanston Community Foundation, we hold a community endowment, and we truly believe that it is community members who are most proximate to the needs and opportunities in Evanston who ought to be determining how our funds should be used. So it's also really important that the applications are clear to the community members too, so that they can engage in that work. So so I know, Melanie spent hours with us, really helping us drill down to what is it that you really want to understand from this applicant, and then how can we pose that question. And so and we really looked at our evaluation criteria, every step of the way, to really identify what are the barriers, how can we strip away the barriers, how can we make sure that we're clear in what we're asking, and we're not asking any more than what we need to make that funding decision. And so we've done that now for all of our grant making processes. And it's really hard to quantify this sort of work, except I can tell you that the number of grant applicants that we've had from community groups who are not 501c3s, who have filled out that application. The number of questions we're getting has decreased. And certainly community members, who are rating grants are clearer on the information coming in. So it's allowing us to really live out our values. If we're saying this is what we want to do out in the community with our funds, we need to make sure that our processes are as barrier-free and as accessible.
That was awesome.
Oh, that is so, it's so exciting to hear, because I think I think there's been lots of talks in the foundation spaces about how to make processes more equitable. So to hear these really concrete things that a community foundation is doing firsthand is just like so exciting. Are there other things that you'd want to talk about in terms of opportunities for foundations to amplify ideas around community equity? Communication equity, whether that's like plain language or other areas around communication that you feel like there's just opportunities for foundations to sort of expand and grow and be more equitable in?
Yes, for sure. So I'd say listening is probably the best opportunity and most widely available opportunity for all foundations to amplify ideas around communication equity, right? Because especially when we think about what exactly communication or effective communication it really is, right? Like at the heart of it, we're talking about it's a combination of listening to understand who you're talking to, right? It's being empathetic to those you are communicating with, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes so that we can communicate in a way that will actually make sense, right? And speaking with intention in terms of tone and word choice, right? Making sure that we are speaking as empathetically and sincerely as possible. And so at the root of all that is listening, right? Understanding who you're speaking to. And so I would say for foundations, that is an opportunity that's right there and readily available to really strengthen and reinforce your community listening mechanisms, because like Becca said, they as in the community members, they are closest to what's going on in community. They can really speak to the needs can really speak to their needs. And so if we're not listening, if we're not actually taking in that perspective, there's no way we can communicate effectively with them, right? And in turn, we wouldn't be able to do our job and be this dynamic and responsive organization or foundation that can be responsive, that can be dynamic and be innovative in our thinking in terms of programming and partnership. So I would implore all foundations, organizations to really examine their community listening mechanisms, because without that foundation, the communication just won't be as effective as it could be, right? So I'd say just making sure that organizations are strengthening their listening mechanisms. And that's something that we take very seriously at the Evanston Community Foundation. I know Becca has spoken to the work we've done to make sure that we're on the ground listening, and that our grant making, our programming is actually fulfilling a need, right? That we aren't just kind of beating our chest saying that we do this great work, but we're actually responding to the needs of the community. And none of that is possible without listening to hear what they need, and being able to communicate and respond to those needs would be impossible as well without that listening piece. So I would say that is the perfect opportunity to advance communication equity.
And I think I was
go,
gonna say,
Sarah.
I think that a big piece of that you all seem to model really well is taking in that feedback and being willing to adapt and change, and not being stuck in how things have been in the past, right? Change isn't easy, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of thought and energy. And so taking that listening, hearing what people are saying, and then taking the time to actualize that is really, really hard, and really wonderful to see you all doing that work and putting in that energy.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think the idea of really listening, like truly listening, is just so powerful. And we see examples of the foundation doing that all the time, like Sarah said. But I think that's such a good point too, because the answers are often there already, right? The community knows often what the community needs. So having that really just open and sincere listening process, transparent processes is so powerful in thinking about really trying to collect that community knowledge that is already there oftentimes, and it's just right, we have to listen. So that's such a great point. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about your work at the foundation, your interest in communication, that we want to make sure we give you space to highlight? We're just, again, so excited to get to celebrate the work you've all been doing in this space. So please feel free to share if there's anything else you want to add.
I think I would just like to reiterate the connection between communications and justice, right? I know at the Community Foundation, we talk a lot about making or helping Evanston thrive as a just, vibrant, and inclusive community. And so one thing that I would like to leave with your listeners and foundations around Evanston, or to wherever this is going to be showcased, is that really framing communication as a justice issue, because at the heart of it, it is, right? Especially in this line of work, when we're working to advance the lives of Evanstonians financially, educationally, we do a lot of work around, or help a lot of work with food insecurity, right? Issues that have very real bearings on people's life and quality of life. And so I would, again, just implore everyone to think about it from a framework of justice, right? Making sure that you're reaching all corners of the community and being intentional about that, whether that is, offering bilingual services, or just really being intentional about tone and word choice, and being intentional about different mediums that you're using to reach different sections of the community. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to, as a foundation, we don't want to have all these resources and programs and services kind of just in a glass tower that people can't access or reach. And communication is quite literally one of the most critical tools to make sure that our message, our resources, our services are getting out there and actually advancing the lives of Evanstonians and helping them thrive.
Well, I can't top that. Oh my gosh, I think that's such a powerful way to wrap up our conversation today. We are so thrilled to recognize the efforts of Evanston Community Foundation for raising up these issues around communication equity. And we just deeply value the work that you all do in the community. And we're just so appreciative of you making time to be with us and talk about these important issues. And thank you for all the work you do.
We're honored to be here, Melanie and Sarah. We've partnered over the last 3 years, and your work really impacts people's lives. And we learn from you every day. You make our work so much better. And so thank you so much for inviting us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.